Welcome to the Jewish Theological Seminary. We are delighted to see you all here at our second annual John Paul II lecture. I'm not going to talk about John Paul II lectures because we have the man who knew John Paul himself, Jack Bemperot, here to tell us about it in a moment. But I do want to welcome you on behalf of the Jewish Theological Seminary. We have been engaged here in Jewish studies for over 125 years. And since 1938, I did the math earlier, that's more than 75 years, the Institute for Religious and Social Studies and now the Milstein Center for Interreligious Dialogue has brought topics of interest to the general public, topics that we hope by having good conversation can help affect the fabric of American life. And I believe that tonight we're going to have one of those conversations and then some. I like to crow, or I used to like to crow, that JTS began its Jewish-Muslim dialogue as early as 1995. And then the Vice Chancellor Emeritus of the Jewish Theological Seminary, Rabbi Michael Greenbaum, handed me a document that he found in our archives in which the late Chancellor Louis Finkelstein invited a group of Muslim scholars to come to the seminary for dialogue in 1956. So I am proud that Finkelstein was my teacher. I am proud that my colleague Arnie Eisen is his successor, and Arnie has filled his shoes quite admirably in leading us to interreligious dialogue, Christian, Muslim, Jew, and others as well. And this is a proud night when we talk about what is potentially a marvelous issue and potentially a difficult issue, and that is the future of Jewish and Muslim relations on America's campuses. I am now going to invite my Rebbe, the man who we all look to really to learn about how to do dialogue properly, Rabbi Jack Bemperot.
Thank you very much. Let me say that this whole idea of the John Paul II Center at the Angelicum, which is the Pontifical University in Rome, which is a little older than the JTS. It was established in 1465. But the brainchild of this center, of which I'm the director, is Angelica Berry. It was her idea that we establish a center there to actually get the best students from all over the world in all religions to begin to learn something about interreligious dialogue and find the ways of talking to one another. And I cannot think of a better place to have this lecture than here at the Jewish Theological Seminary. Apart from Bert's great work and Arnie Eisen's leadership, I remember being here when as dear friends of Professor Heschel and Kaplan and others who were real champions of interreligious dialogue, when being interreligious and engaging in interreligious dialogue was not such an important thing, or for that matter, popular thing. This school has a real reputation in that, and it has continued it under the label leadership of these gentlemen, and so I'm personally delighted, and I know that the Berry Foundation is delighted to be here. And the John Paul II Center is glad to be represented here. One question you might ask is, why is it that the center is called the John Paul II Center? Apart from the modesty of the Berry people in not calling it the Berry Center, I think one of the reasons, two reasons really. First is because John Paul II was an alumnus of the Angelicum. He actually got his doctorate there. And so having studied there and having a real solid position there is one of the reasons to call it John Paul II. But the second reason I think is perhaps even more important, and that is that John Paul II very early understood what the real plight of the Jews was. He himself had an apartment, his family had an apartment that were Jews owned the apartment. He had friends, and he did everything he could to rectify all kinds of horrible things that happened to the Jews. He specifically, everywhere he went, over 100 countries, he met with the Jewish community. In Poland, when he went back there, he specifically said that the Jews are a great, great warning to humanity and to all people that this kind of thing should never happen again. He was talking about the Holocaust. And what I want to do is finally quote about the John Paul II Center, a statement that he made, which unfortunately is not included in his Spiritual Pilgrimages, which is the book that contains his speeches, where he was speaking to the Jewish community. He said the following. He said, Vatican II is a teaching which is not something fitting, but much more an expression of the faith, an inspiration of the Holy Spirit, and a word of the divine wisdom. To elevate Vatican II to be an expression of the Holy Spirit and a word of the divine wisdom, a statement that actually rectified 2,000 years of teaching, misteachings really, about Jews and Judaism. So that's one of the main reasons we want to call this center the John Paul II Center. It's my great, great privilege now to introduce to you, although he was very modest. He says, don't say anything about me. Everybody, all you have to say is that I'm basically the executive religion editor of the Huffington Post. But I just want to say two things about him. He was a distinguished chaplain at Princeton and put Princeton on the map when it came to actually being involved in action that had to do with social justice and had to do with real communication among religions. And secondly, he was with me when we were together meeting with the Iranians. And it's not a simple matter to meet with the Iranians, let me tell you. But he distinguished himself and spoke eloquently there. And I know on the basis of his sterling performance with the Iranians that he's going to do brilliantly tonight. Thank you.
So my name is Paul Raushenbush, and I want to say, first of all, that I feel very blessed to be here. I'm very honored to be a part of this. I'm honored by the invitation from Chancellor Eisen, from Rabbi Burt, and Rabbi Jack is a hero for so many of us in the interfaith movement. And I also want to extend my deep appreciation and thanks to Angelica Berry for all of her work and her contribution to this. I guess I want to start just by saying that I think what we're doing, I love this quote from John Paul II about a sense of the spirituality of interfaith dialogue and being with people who are different from us and trying to have an honest, truthful, engaged, productive conversation is a discipline. And it's something that rarely happens without the kind of discipline that is involved in spiritual discipline and training. And so I think we are living in such a beautiful, horrible, hopeful, tragic time. And the opportunities are immense, and the opportunities to fail are immense. We are always on the precipice of great flights and also just falling and being dashed on the rocks. Our world is very small. So what these three people are doing with their lives on university campuses where the world comes very closely together. Having served at Princeton for 8 years as one of the deans of the chapel in religious life, where my primary work was in interfaith engagement, the opportunity of the university campus for engagement, bringing people together, talking, becoming friends, helping one another. One of the great friendships was this that I experienced at Princeton was this fellow who had studied at yeshiva and this Palestinian Arab, and they both applied to be on this religious life council, which was this interfaith council. And I was like, okay, how is this going to go? And I was like, okay, so how do you feel about the other? And they said, oh, you know what? He's teaching me Hebrew and he's teaching me Arabic, and it's awesome because my Arabic is so much better. So the opportunity of what these three individuals are doing on university campuses is wonderful. And so I just invite all of us to come with a a spirit of possibility tonight. And again, it's my great honor to introduce them. I'm going to introduce them, giving some basic facts, and then they will speak in the order that I've introduced them, and then we'll have a conversation, and then we'll be opening it up to a wider conversation. So I'm starting with Imam Abdullah Antepli, who is the Muslim chaplain and adjunct faculty of Islamic Studies at Duke University. He's... No Blue Devils? Okay, that's the Duke corner right there, and that's... You've established yourself, but this is not basketball, okay? He's also truly one of the America's leading Muslim advocates of interfaith work, especially in Jewish-Muslim reconciliation. He's educated in Turkey, and he is the founder and executive board member of the Muslim Chaplain Association. Rabbi Gail Swedroe, okay, has been the assistant director and campus rabbi at the University of Florida Hillel since 2012. And here's the most important thing. She is a graduate of Jewish Theological Seminary. Okay, where's that? Come on, people. There we go. Duke Schmook. We got a... Yes, here I'm talking about let's all come together, and I'm creating this rivalry already. No. And she studied with Rabbis Without Borders Fellowship, and she is a proud member of the second cohort of the Hartman Institute Campus Professionals Fellowship, and Rabbi Swedroe is also a member of University of Florida's Campus Multi-Faith Cooperative. And last but certainly not least is Dr. Mehnaz Afridi, who is the Assistant Professor of Religious Studies and Director of Holocaust, Genocide, and Interfaith Education Center at Manhattan College. She is committed to interfaith and Holocaust education, and she's interested in contemporary Islam and issues of gender within Islam. And she's working on her forthcoming book, which is coming out soon, which is very exciting, Shoah Through Muslim Eyes. She was born in Karachi, Pakistan, raised in Europe and the Middle East, and she brings with her a multicultural perspective. Will you please join me in welcoming these three outstanding panelists? Imam Antepli, will you come up?
We will talk about Duke later. Good evening, everybody. Assalamu alaikum. It is absolutely an honor and pleasure to be here with you at this beautiful school. JTS is a very special place because most of my partners in crime in Jewish-Muslim relations are JTS graduates. So it's actually an honor to be at the school which produced all my rabbi friends and the community leaders. The existing Hillel director at Duke University and the present and former rabbi is also a JTS graduate. So it's a pleasure to be here. And especially under the name of Pope John Paul II, whom we will bring up his name, his blessed soul, and his ability in relatively defeating the Christian anti-Semitism and the bridges that he has built between Christianity and Judaism and Christians and Jews. It has enormous amount of potential to inspire Muslims and Jews today to do the similar kind of bridge building and repairing between Jews and Muslims. Duke University is an interesting place. Let me start with that one. It's actually the only place I know where it's halachically kosher and shar'an, Islamically halal to pray for the devils. I don't know anywhere else. On Friday, quite literally, the Muslims around noontime after Friday prayer and the Jews a couple of hours later after Shabbat service, they quite literally say, Baruch Ata Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, Ya Rabbal Alameen, the Muslims say in Arabic, Ya Zal Jalali wal Ikram, victory for the devils. But more importantly, destruction for their enemies. If you are looking for an overarching identity where the political differences, sectarian differences, and religious differences completely disappear, really college basketball, the campus culture about athletics, can be a source of inspiration for all of us. Israeli-Palestinian conflict, piece of cake. Duke-UNC rivalry, there is no hope. Even the Messiah cannot fix it. the future of Judaism and Islam on American college campuses. And we are given the task to speak about 10 to 15 minutes to provoke some conversation for many of us here, those who are Jews, Christians, Muslims, and others. And since the time is short, and since our chancellor also over the dinner invited us to do the real talk, yes, there is a fuller side of the glass, and there are wonderful and inspiring conversations are taking place. But I think I'm going to focus more on the emptier side of the glass, which is huge. And I think the kind of urgency that Jewish-Muslim relations in general, Jewish-Muslim conversations in the United States on college campuses in particular, the emptier side of the glass, the things it is not necessarily impressive and not getting any better, or if getting worse, is so significant. I say this after all these Blue Devil jokes. You will see the kind of brokenness in my voice and the intensity of my sense of urgency that things are just doesn't look impressive and not getting any better. There needs to be a very inserted, intentional, strong effort and mobilization to basically bring these communities together, so close enough so that we can build the bridges. Because for the most part, for the many communities, they are so far away from each other that you cannot even build the bridges. I say this as a starting point. If anyone in the audience really, if they think Jewish-Muslim relations can't be better, if Jews and Muslims are having a wonderful time, if the Jewish-Muslim conversations around the world, especially in the United States, doesn't need any kind of improvement, there is really no talk. The rest of my remarks will not make any sense to you. But to me, that's a utopia, focusing on few individuals and few small success stories and ignoring the huge elephants in the room. I think it doesn't give us any service. At Duke, again, whenever you tell people this kind of too good to be true stories or singing Kumbaya stories, they say, "What are you smoking lately?" Let's be real. Let's talk about the real issues that the Jews and Muslims are facing, and what are some of the challenges and the opportunities on college campuses Jews and Muslims can take on and exemplify and model inspiring Jewish-Muslim conversations to the rest of the United States and rest of the world Jewry and rest of the Ummah, the Muslim world as well. The reality on the ground, as I said, far from being rosy. If you speak about Jewish-Muslim relations in general, anti-Semitism in the Muslim world, in different parts of the Muslim world, is on the rise. And a Muslim anti-Semitism, there has been historically Muslim anti-Semitism, but unlike Christian anti-Semitism, it was never deeply rooted in Islamic theology. It was never fed through the core teachings of the Islamic teachings. And it was episodic, it was instant to a certain period and certain time. My admiration to the relative defeat of Christian anti-Semitism is people like Pope John Paul II, John the 23rd, these guys moved mountains because what they had to deal with was so central to Christian teaching, Christian understanding. I am not brushing or putting the entire Christian theology as anti-Semitic, but the existing Christian anti-Semitism took its theological strength from the very central core teachings of Christianity. In Islam, it was never the case. Like if you go to Yad Vashem in Jerusalem, the very first stand that they take you to teach the history of anti-Semitism is what? Jesus on the cross. Like Muslim anti-Semitism, on the contrary, it was never sort of this, in a similar way, central Muslim teachings, what makes somebody Muslim. But as things get better, as the political situation in the Middle East is getting worse, as people more and more feed themselves with more anti-Semitic material, and the political problem in the Middle East is fueling the fire, the Muslim anti-Semitism is getting or becoming like that. That people go back to Muslim theology, Muslim history, find those scriptures, find those episodes, find those individuals, and rewrite their own history, and pushing the theological and religious legitimacy and credibility of those despicable hate message and basically Islamizing them further and further. Muslim, if you think I am exaggerating, I am one of the victims of that anti-Semitism. People, when they hear my intensity often, why are you so obsessed with Jews? Why are you so obsessed, or you consider, they call, why are you so tirelessly trying to improve the Jewish-Muslim relations? Because I am a victim of this newly emerged and increasingly getting worse Muslim anti-Semitism. I don't want to reinsert the existing stereotypes. Not every single Muslim is born and raised as anti-Semite either. But it's not entirely uncommon, the kind of secular, not religious, but chauvinist national education that I have received, the upbringing that I have received in Turkey. The first book that I read about Jews and Judaism at the age of 12, 13 was the children's version of the Protocols of the Elders of Zion. Children's version of it. A very sophisticated propaganda material putting modern pictures of Israeli-Palestinian conflict atrocities and putting the verses of Torah, Tanakh, and different Jewish teachings under it, trying to make a connection that something is innately, inherently wrong with this religion. Something is innately, inherently wrong with this people. And I spent a number of years believing in that kind of something is innately, inherently, irredeemably evil and wrong and destructive about Jews and Judaism. But alhamdulillah, Baruch Hashem, as you say, God of love and God of mercy and compassion, He did not leave me live in that kind of hate message. And I was able to go through the kind of life journey to get that poison and toxic thing out of my system. But I still consider myself as a recovering anti-Semite. Because old habits die hard, because all these modern challenges you are facing, it keeps scratching the old wounds as well. But it's so interesting though, when I say I'm a recovering anti-Semite, I remember some of the Jewish parents calling to Duke University saying, he confessed that he was an anti-Semite. I want to make sure I am working so hard. I have taken the nearest exit and driving to opposite direction for so many years now. But I acknowledge that it's a lifelong journey. It's a lifelong struggle to go through and take that poison out of yourself. So we have nothing really to deceive ourselves that things are just rosy, wonderful, few individual relationships and few different projects here and there. There is a huge challenge facing Jews and Muslims vis-a-vis each other. So we have every reason to get really worried about the future of Judaism and Islam and vis-a-vis Jewish-Muslim relations, and do everything we can to bring these communities together and build bridges. And as doing so, we are not doing favor to anyone. We are not doing favor to anyone. We have every self-interest to work and improve the Jewish-Muslim relations as Jews and Muslims. It is not exaggeration to say that the 20th century was the century where Judaism and the world Jewry had to come to terms and reconcile with the world of Christianity and Christians. And I think it's not exaggeration to say the 21st century will be for Jews and Judaism to come to terms and reconcile with the world of Islam and the global Muslim community. Inshallah, Bizrat Hashem. And if that's the task and challenge, if I can convince you, all the depressing note that I have brought up, don't worry, I'm not going to leave you in the valley of hopelessness. That brings a moral imperative for American Jews and Muslims to model how is it going to look like. How is that reconciliation of Judaism and Jews with Islam and Muslims will look like? Even if for a Pakistani Muslim, Malaysian Muslim, if they see anti-Semitism is rising, the Jewish-Muslim relations are not going all that well, the way we see Jews and Judaism and the state of Israel today is becoming self-destructive. It's poisoning us. It's changing us. It's not revealing the best of us. For Pakistani, Malaysian Muslim, what can they do in Pakistan and Malaysia? There are no Jews there. But it's a moral imperative for American Muslims and American Jews, because we are here. And we live in a country with all these civil liberties, especially on college campuses. We are morally, ethically more responsible to model what that 21st century, a similar reconciliation coming to terms with between Judaism and Islam, between Jews and Muslims will look like. And we have to show to the rest of the world, global community. One thing about me also, in addition to being the Blue Devil Imam, since I live in North Carolina, since I have been living there, people listen to me the way I speak and say, are you sure you are an Imam? I say, yes. No, there's a Southern Baptist preacher in you. So I just warmed up. I want to get that Southern Baptist preacher out of me, but time is already up. I will already say a few challenges and opportunities in our attempt to shoulder that ethical moral responsibility, that voice from Sinai calling American Jews and American Muslims, saying you are responsible. If there isn't going to be any reconciliation, any coming to terms with, it will be you will exemplify this to the rest of the world. I think there are a number of challenges that the Jews and Muslims here in the United States face, and the kind of rising anti-Semitism in the Muslim world is not unique to, or it's not only one way. I have to say, the Islamophobia among the Jewish community, the Islamophobia is in increasing number, is poisoning the many Jewish hearts and minds and taking deeper roots here in the United States and on other parts of the world as well. There are a number of challenges, unfortunately, the unseen walls, seemingly, on college campuses that these Jews and Muslims are hitting and not going anywhere. One of the challenge, if I go pretty quickly, I just skipped through some of the major details that I wanted to talk, maybe in the Q&A session it will come out. We Jews and Muslims on college campuses, we have to diversify our sources of information about each other. We have to stop feeding ourselves about each other through a selective sources of information which doesn't do good to any of us. We have to stop. I invite everybody, who are the Muslims that you know? Who are the Muslims that you pay attention to? When is an Islam as a religion and Muslims as people come into your attention? Or vice versa, when the word Jews and Judaism and Israel come to a Muslim attention? What kind of source of information that we are feeding ourselves? So that the image of that religion and the faith tradition, unfortunately, becomes very unimpressive. I was going to go on and on. I was just sharing over the dinner table the kind of Jews that Muslims know or makes hero. Many Jews themselves, they don't know these Jews. And the kind of Muslims that many Jews know, and allowing those Muslims to shape the image of Islam and Muslims in their heart is unfortunate. 3 years ago, I had the honor to visit Afghanistan and visit our troops, our US troops in Afghanistan. It was during the month of Ramadan. They didn't have enough number of Muslim chaplains, so I went to visit our troops. And the US Embassy in Kabul, they took this as an opportunity to arrange meetings with me and the Taliban imams, so that as if I'm going to convince them. It was one of the most depressing experiences that I could ever imagine. The horror, the people that you think it only exists in the horror movies, it's right in front of you. Just to give you an example of how we keep sort of feeding ourselves with the kind of information or the kind of individuals as a source of information about that faith tradition. One guy, when he was vomiting his anti-Semitism to me, and he's the chief regional director of the religious affairs, I said, how much Jewish theology and Judaism that you know to justify what you are saying? Tell me one Jewish theologian that you know. This is a guy in the mountains of Afghanistan. It's a very underdeveloped country. It's very disconnected from the rest of the world. He immediately, with no hesitation, said, Baruch Goldstein and the chief rabbi Mordechai Eliyahu. How many Jews here even know who Mordechai Eliyahu is? He is a former chief Sephardic rabbi of Israel, and during the 2008 Gaza war, the reason he knows, he issued a halachic verdict. He issued a religious ruling to use the carpet bomb and kill even everybody in Gaza. Does he represent all Israel? Does he represent Jews and Judaism? Absolutely not. But this guy in Afghanistan knows who he is, and with no hesitation brings up his name immediately. As Osama bin Laden, Zarqawi, and all these evil people doing evil business in the name of Islam is shaping the image of Islam and Muslims for many Jews, the same is happening on the other side of the aisle as well. We have to find out a way to diversify our source of information about each other. We have to find out a way to ease our Jewish and Muslim stubbornness. Muslims have to ease their stubbornness to think and imagine Jews as cute minorities who we allowed their synagogues to be open and they are freely worshipped in the Muslim land, which is all nice and good. But you cannot imagine how many college conversations stop there. Like how many times I felt if one more Muslim say, I'm from Tunis, my grandparents allowed Jews to freely worship. The Jews that we are talking today, Muslims have to understand, have to bring themselves to understand that not the same Jews of Tunis and Saloniko and Istanbul anymore. This is a different conversation. Most of that good intentioned, we treated Jews very well, is not working. It's patronizing. It's even fueling the fire in a very subtle way. In the same way, I think... Say again? I know my time is up. No. But if I just go through the entry point for many Jews, for any conversations, that stop us. Explain me first 9/11, first jihad, first Hezbollah and Hamas, then I will open my heart and head to the world of Islam. This religion has been around for 1400 years. Muslims have been around all that many, many years. Islam was not invented. Muslims were not invented, as some genius politicians say sometimes these days. That one has to extend their memory and understanding beyond these problematic elements. There has to be on college campuses bilateral Jewish-Muslim conversations, and Jewish-Muslim conversations should not get lost in the overall Hindu, Muslim, Buddhist, Christian, which is wonderful. But Jews and Muslims have very special issues and very special opportunities, similarities, a common history, a very similar theological and legal judicial issues that we have to establish a bilateral relationship and conversations on college campuses. We have to stop using our renegades. We have to stop inviting these speakers on college campuses, which confirms the evil image of the other. We have to, so interesting, just 2 years ago, I hope we are among friends and we are talking so honestly with each other. In many ways, I'm a big admirer of Chabad movement, Chabad organization. What they are doing, the spiritual spark that they would like to keep within the Jewish community is amazing. But they are not known with their interfaith theology. They are not known with their obsession to reach out and tell the jewels of Judaism to Christians. It's so interesting. But even some organization which is as insular, as intra-Jewish as Chabad, for the last couple of years, for example, they are inviting the son of Hamas to many college campuses as a speaker, giving very handsome honorarium to this guy. Do you know son of Hamas? Have you heard about this son of Hamas? One of the founding members of the Hamas as a movement, his son got into Israeli jail, and through some God knows what, he turned into an apocalyptic, end-of-time, born-again Christian. And somehow got out of jail and came to the United States, and of course, telling all the bad and evil things that you can imagine about Islam and Muslims. What he is saying, in short, it's not about terrorism, it's not about jihad, Al-Qaeda, Osama bin Laden. It's all about Allah. This Allah is evil, bloodthirsty. It's because of their religion that these people are basically saying this. Why would any Jewish community to invite this person, or similarly, Muslims return the favor, and they bring the Jewish version of these, normal Finkelsteins and name it. I can give several other names. We have to stop, though that really stops the conversation. In terms of opportunities, Jews and Muslims, it's so interesting. When the Pew result came, I immediately received 12 calls from various Muslim communities to discuss Pew results because the Pew results gave us some insights about the future of Islam and the shape and image of American Muslim identity. Jews can be the light to all nations, but especially to Muslims, and help us learn from their experience to establishing themselves as a beloved minority in the United States. I was going to talk about the model co-study, Jewish-Muslim study circles that should be established on college campuses, but I will end there with my favorite Jewish hymn and Jewish prayer. That it's so spiritually blind of us if we don't see the hands of God bringing 6 to 7 million of Jews to the heart of Islam in the Middle East, and the same number of Muslims to the United States, where Jews is a beloved minority. And I hope Oze Shalom Bimrumav, Huyaze Shalom Aleinu, Vayakol Israel, Vayakol Ishmael, Vayakol Beni Adam, as God, through global realities, bring us together, as He established peace in the heavens, help us establish peace here in the United States, especially on college campuses, and model that peace for the rest of the world. Vimru, Vimru, Amen.
A special thank you again to Professor Bert Visotsky and the Berry Foundation and everybody else who allowed tonight to be a possibility. So I'm going to focus primarily on what it means to be a minority, a religious minority on college campuses today, and how some of our special needs might help bring the Muslim and Jewish communities together. When I first moved to Gainesville, Florida, about a year and a half ago, I was rudely awakened from my shtetl existence of living on the Upper West Side for the past 5 years. No longer could I assume that kosher meat, frozen, definitely not fresh, would be available at any grocery store, but certainly not the one closest to my apartment. The idea of people knowing what Jewish holidays, aside from Hanukkah, were but a faint memory. And if I wanted to spend Shabbat with a community after Saturday morning services, my best bet would be to join a tailgating crew for the Gators. This is the world my students live in. It is possible to find kosher food if one is willing to look for it, but meal plans in the dining halls and Greek houses, even the historically Jewish ones, present challenges. And though Jews are usually happy to explain their tradition to people, friends who have questions, they usually feel incredibly inadequately prepared to do so, especially around topics around the Messiah and the afterlife, which seem to be favorite themes for people who are meeting the first Jew of their lives. And though matzo ball soup is a real highlight of many of their Friday nights, so is bleeding orange and blue come Saturday morning. So if one wants to be Jewish on the typical college campus, one must actively choose to do so. And when time is really the most valuable resource of any college student, if religion or cultural identity is going to be given any allocation of this finite treasure, it has to be filling a real need. Otherwise, there is no way that it is going to be given priority on a busy millennials calendar. This need to express, connect, or explore one's religious or cultural identity is going to look very different for different people, and our organizations must be able to fill these varied needs. This fall's Pew study on Jews in America showed that 32% of millennial Jews identify as not having any religion. Their Jewish identity, therefore, stems from their ancestry, ethnicity, or culture. This frightens many people because cultural Judaism is often labeled as somehow being less than. Critics of the cultural-only connection to Judaism will focus on the fact that we truly became a religious group at Mount Sinai when we received the Torah. But as I've come to realize through my studies with the Hartman Institute, there is more than one model for Jewish identity presented in the Torah. And for those of you who have studied Judaism or Jewish texts at all, I'm sure that hearing that there's more than one opinion in them comes as a huge shock to all of you. So yes, we have the Exodus model, which focuses on laws and a covenantal relationship with God, but there is also the Genesis model of our patriarchs, that you are Jewish because you are a member of the tribe, quite literally, because your family is Jewish and you hold a certain set of values to be dear. So given that 32% of the millennial Jewish population says that they don't have a religion, the question that seems to demand a real answer is, how do we create meaningful Jewish experiences for someone who identifies Jewishly based on the Genesis model? I believe that when students understand how and why their values are inherently Jewish, when they have an opportunity to engage with their Jewish identity, with how their Jewish identity informs the decisions that they make, and have a context for these values to be classified as Jewish, that campus professionals can strengthen cultural Jewish identities. It will provide a framework for them to identify as what Avram Infeld, a past president of Hillel, would describe as distinctively Jewish, universally human. For the increasing percent who don't believe in God, we need to shift the questions that are being asked, as Rabbi Art Green says, from, do you believe that God created the world, and when did this happen, to, do you encounter a divine presence in the natural world around you, and what does that encounter call upon you to do? If we are to make the teachings of our tradition relevant to this segment of our population, we need to not only talk about the God of thunder and lightning with commands at Sinai, but also the God present in the story of Elijah, the Bat Kol, the still small voice that exists in each of us. And how beautiful that our tradition presents these multiple understandings of God so that we can find different ways of connecting with the divine in multiple ways. And therefore, it is up to the Jewish community and imperative for us to find ways of validating those different encounters, for our members to welcome a plurality of Jewish identities in our communities. Given some of the challenges facing the Muslim community on campuses, it would seem to make sense for us to come together and engage in conversations about challenges of faith, as well as what it means to be a part of a group that has faced religious persecution, or how to balance a particularist identity with a more inclusive American one. I never really stopped to think, as my colleague pointed out earlier, that if we can all come together to cheer on the Gators, that perhaps we can come together for something besides football. Although basketball, I heard we're now tied #1 with Syracuse, so maybe basketball too. However, those are not meant to be fighting words, so sorry to the Duke corner over there. However, because from my experience at least, whenever Muslims and Jews walk into a room together as specifically part of a religious or cultural gathering, it feels that we need to get past the elephant in the room of the politics in Israel and Palestine before we discuss anything else. It can be challenging to have these other conversations. What strikes me as both interesting and frustrating is that before engaging in a conversation with anyone about anything that's somewhat controversial, it's usually considered to be in best practice to get to know one another and develop a relationship and establish some form of trust. But when it comes to Muslim and Jewish relations, my experience has been that we try to address the really hard things first, rather than starting with where we might be able to establish some common ground and build a relationship. Whether it's how holidays conflict with the academic calendar, dietary restrictions, how one makes decisions about whether or not to wear religious garb when one is a minority community, especially maybe someplace like the South where there's all sorts of other preconceived notions going on. Parental pressures to date and marry somebody of the same religion. But this is not where most Muslim-Jewish dialogues start on campuses. They jump straight to the politics of Israel and Palestine. Without ignoring the need to talk about these very difficult things, a better place to start would be to have a conversation about what each person values, what it means to have a homeland, what their tradition teaches about having power, what their personal connection to the land in question is. But in order for this to happen, Jews and Muslims need to be able to take a step back from the rhetoric and engage in personal reflection to be able to answer these questions for themselves. Something that is rarely done because people are too busy fighting for what they feel is so close to being lost. Perhaps if we were to have these values-based conversations, we could move past the fear to hear the experience of the other and to validate it as a real lived human experience. From here, we could build relationships and support one another as members of minority groups in this country. This would be a huge help towards addressing a general challenge of working with college students, a lack of institutional memory. My experience of working to establish Muslim-Jewish relations at UF have started with a smile here, an introduction there, a sort of nervous hesitation as we begin to speak. And I'm so acutely aware of the differential and power dynamics, and yet I don't have a Muslim counterpart to speak with the Muslims. We're not fortunate enough to have an Imam as part of our chaplain staff. My sense from Muslim students when they first speak with me is that they're not really sure why I'm taking the time to speak with them. that they're wary of me, and I don't necessarily blame them. On a campus with evangelical ministers proselytizing in the quad during passing periods and a strong pro-Israel delegation, what good could they expect from a religious outsider with authority speaking to them? And yet, they smile. They tell me about some interfaith programs that they're thinking about putting together and ask me about what my role on campus exactly is. There's some benefits to being the new person still. And I make it a real point of stopping by the Islam on Campus table whenever I'm walking through that part of campus. I've begun to ask myself what the real objective is for me to stop and have these interactions. And what I've concluded is that more than anything, I want there to be a relationship between the Muslim and Jewish communities at UF. The Campus Multi-Faith Cooperative allows me to speak regularly and build relationships with more than a dozen other religious leaders, but because there is no full-time staff member that's part of a larger national organization that the university could reach out to if there were any challenges, Islam on campus is not at the table, quite literally. And so I find myself in the position of needing to actively seek out the relationships so that our two groups can be in conversation. And so I know who to direct my student leaders to if an opportunity presents itself. I feel a great pressure to develop these relationships quickly so that despite the lack of full-time staff at the nearby mosque and the quick turnover of student leaders that's inherent on any college campus, that these relationships will be passed down from one year to the next, and every fall won't be starting back at square one again. Because I have been greeted warmly, I continue to pursue the forming of a relationship. Recently, there was a bill brought up at the UF Student Senate, a preemptive anti-BDS bill. BDS stands for Boycott, Divestment, and Sanctions. And I attended the presentation as a spectator to witness for myself whatever conversations might arise. Many of the students that I had met on Islam on campus were there, and though the tension in the air was palpable, when I saw students that I knew, regardless of their religion or political leanings, I made it a point of going over and greeting them. And they returned my greeting, which may seem like a very small thing, but it was incredibly important to me. For if we can't greet one another, even when we're standing on opposite sides of the table, then we have no hope of engaging in productive conversations. Pirkei Avot, a Jewish collection of wisdom sayings, teaches that people should mekabel et kol ha'adam besever panim yafot, that we should greet every person with a cheerful countenance. So my blessing for all of us as we move forward from this evening is that may we continue to greet each and every person, regardless of their belief, with a cheerful countenance as we strive to build and deepen our relationships with one another. And may this enable us to learn from one another as we strive to strengthen our own religious and cultural communities. Amen.
And I don't have a sports metaphor. Sorry about that. Okay. Thank you so much, Bert, for having me here, inviting me here, and Angelica and JTS. I'm actually very honored to be here, and I want to say that in the company of Imam Antepli and Rabbi Swedroe, right? It's been wonderful to meet you. And also you and I keep bumping into each other everywhere. So this has been a very nice gathering for me. I'm actually an academic, so I'm going to stay to 10 minutes. And
Academics stay to 10 minutes?
It was a joke about the Imam and the Rabbi. You have to get it. Okay, so... and also, I'm going to stick to my assignment, which is to talk about the future of Judaism and Islam. Actually, recently, because of this panel, I started to read a book by Frederick Rudolph, which is about the history of the United States in higher education, which I found fascinating, about how the first universities were built in the United States, Harvard, Princeton, and what was the goal of these universities, including the issue of diversity. So I got very intrigued and sidetracked by this whole panel, which is very educating. So I'm going to start with a quote from that book. When Adam walked with Eve in the Garden of Eden, he was overheard saying, presumably by the angel just arrived with a flaming sword, "You must understand, my dear, we are living in a period of transition." This story from the repertoire of President Lotus D. Kaufman of the University of Minnesota after World War II assumed a peculiar appropriateness for the history of higher education in the United States. One era was over, another began. One era was over, and another began. We are indeed in another era today, where Jewish and Muslim history have become a major fabric of higher learning on campus. But because of the many events in the world, especially the Middle East and the War of Terror, have become at times the magnified lens of geopolitics of American campus life. Today, America's colleges and universities are defined by their multiplicity and diversity. Insistence on equal opportunity abounds. The reason is the American system has something to offer to virtually everyone, to some extent today. This distinction of accessibility indeed has colonial roots, despite the extreme degree of exclusivity in the early years of American higher education. Nevertheless, the early evolution of higher education laid the foundations for the system that gradually emerged and distinguished itself from virtually every other system in the world. Indeed, and this is the really fantastic university in Singapore, Shanghai Zhuang Tong University's Institute of Higher Education releases its annual academic ranking of world universities. As many as 60 American universities are listed in the top 100 universities in the world. There are 3 points that I want to make in my 10 minutes that might paint an interesting picture of the hard work and challenges we have left to do on American campuses and the future of Judaism and Islam. Coming from Los Angeles campuses 2.5 years ago to New York campuses has been an interesting adventure in terms of being a Muslim who teaches world religions, Islam, and Holocaust studies. The political tensions of geopolitical media bombardment have pressured campuses to turn to, on the ground, intellectual knowledge of different faiths and the religious connections between one another. Students on certain campuses have made news in the complexity of Jewish-Muslim presence on secular, public, private, and Catholic campuses. The first example that comes to mind is UC Irvine, where I was invited to create a better relations between Muslim Student Union and Jewish organization Hillel. The controversy, among many of them, was over something like the Holocaust Holy Land Week, belittling of the Holocaust. Another example, in our neighborhood, Columbia University here, has its own set of issues with MILAC, Middle Eastern Asian languages and cultures, issues of anti-Semitism and anti-Muslim sentiment, which has been a boisterous issue post 9/11 and was a bigger issue in 2005 across the nation's campuses. Perhaps this is the empty side of the glass that the Imam was referring to. Or perhaps today we have the American Academic University boycotting Israel and asking other institutions to follow along. These are, however, the issues between Jews and Muslims on campus that are neither in nature about religion, but the identity of being Jewish or Muslim in the US. So what is indeed the future of these two closely resembling traditions and cultures in America? There are many complex and perhaps challenging histories of both of these traditions outside of the US, but here in the US, there is, I believe, some promise and optimism for the student body. My own story at Manhattan College, a Catholic Lasallian school which stands out as a small, inclusive, friendly, and unique in that as a Muslim, you can also be a Lasallian, which has 5 major points: concern for the poor and social justice, respect for all people, inclusive community, quality education, and faith in the presence of God. And for me, as a LaSallian at the college for almost 3 years, I would add that we keep building room and opportunities for interfaith events on campus and off campus with service projects around the Bronx. As a Muslim who advocates for Jews on campus and in the community, encourages better relations on campus. The Muslim Students Association on our campus has been committed to Islam and awareness rather than indulging in politically charged issues. This has made a deep and significant contribution to our campus. Manhattan College's Muslim Students Association is run by an African-American woman convert. The vice president is an Asian woman, and the treasurer is a Hispanic woman. The group is diverse and has been slowly effective in making their presence known. Catholic colleges, however, do not attract many Jewish students, and according to our own assessment at the college, they are not even a visible percentage. The last 5 years reported 9 enrolled Jewish students every year out of about 2,600. This is our challenge. While the first MSA was established in 1963, the first Hillel chapter was established in 1923 on the same campus, which was University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. The two groups have very different histories, and off-campus groups have created support at times and no support at times. Hillel has had much more financial support, about $63 million in its 531 chapters, versus Muslim groups who have less historical presence and financial backing and are seen as a weakened and new presence on campus. As a rabbi and imam have pointed out, that these issues are issues that are politicized, they're about anti-Semitism and Islamophobia. There is, however, a different history of Jews and Muslims in America that needs to be addressed. Jews and Muslims in America can share their history, can share the notion of the other, the outsider, the erotic, sometimes the exotic, the dark, right? A lot of the characters are similar. However, today, Jews have an established society in America which is very different from Muslims. 60% of Muslim students are born outside of the United States. So there is a different generation that is being produced in America. Here you have the fourth generation of Jewish Americans, which are mainly from Ashkenazi descent. So there's a big, big shift if you look at the history of that. Finally, I think the issues at hand and challenges are about really identity and power. They are not about religion. Like the Imam so well pointed out, and I point out in my own work, anti-Semitism can be indeed linked to theology, but it has to be linked by someone. And it is our job as educators of higher learning to indulge in another direction, where interreligious dialogue is in the center of the campus, not on the periphery, but in the center of the campus. Freedom of speech is wonderful if it does not disempower the other. Can we not discuss the elephant of the room without taking each other's freedom away? As Imam al-Ghazali, the 11th century theologian, wrote, even if a person reads and teaches 100,000 books on intellectual and knowledgeable issues, but does not act on any of it, then it will not benefit him at all. Thank you.
Just before the Reverend Raushenbush mixes it up with our extraordinary panelists, I want to invite you to think about your questions. When you came in, you should have received a note card. Hold up your note cards, and a golf pencil, not to record your score, but to give you the opportunity to write down questions you may have. If you do not have an index card or pencil and would like one, and raise your hand, Katie and Ben will happily provide you with one. And your questions will come to me. I'll sort them and give them to Paul so that when the conversation among the panelists ends, he will also be able to field some of your questions in that hopefully civilized fashion. Paul, take it away.
Just before we go on, I just want to say that was such a remarkably diverse and interesting way of touching at so many issues. And I would like to invite us to give all of the panelists a show of appreciation. I would say it was 11 minutes, so just... Anyway. So I wanted to start with a question that I think goes to some of what we've been talking about, which is within the Muslim community, within the Jewish community, are there voices that are dominant? Are there voices that become the orthodoxy? And are there ways of creating more voices within one's own tradition? So I'm in some ways talking about intra-faith dialogue in order to do inter-faith dialogue. How do you decide who is speaking for the Jewish community, especially when there are often several Jewish communities, and in some campuses, several Muslim communities? Anybody can speak to this, but you all kind of hinted at it, and I'm wondering if that sparks some thoughts. And maybe you could just use the mics in front of you if you...
So every campus is clearly going to be extremely different. People seem to be very surprised by the fact that at one campus, the Reform community might have the largest attendance on a Friday night, and then the Orthodox students will barely be able to make a minyan if they exist, and another campus will have the complete opposite, hundreds of Orthodox students with maybe 8 Reform students on a Friday night. And but what I've seemed to have been able to witness over my 2 years at UF is that once a group has the sort of reputation of being the louder voice, it's a little bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy, and it takes a particularly strong student leader who is confident in their ability to stand out and say something that maybe is not as the popular voice on campus, as it were. In regards to some of the political areas, there's so many outside groups that want to partner with our students, and so also to some extent, money makes the world go round, and so whichever outside organizations are able to provide additional funding to support students, those are usually able to help their voices be heard above everything else.
That's actually an excellent question, and it challenges the main myth that Jewish community and the Muslim community are monolithic, homogeneous, one type, one shape. That's far from being true. Neither communities are monolithic, either in their ideology and political persuasions. And I'll give you 2 examples from Duke campus. For example, how the intra-faith challenges within Jewish community and within the Muslim community affects one another. One of the most active pro-Palestinian student organizations in the United States is called Students for Justice in Palestine. The Duke chapter of Duke Justice for Palestine, its faculty advisor is Jewish, Israeli. More than 60% of its members are Jewish. So to think that pro-Palestinian camp is completely Muslim. And there are a number of Muslim students, I do an enter and exit interviews to them. When I ask them, what are the top 3 things as part of your college Muslim experience you don't want to get involved? And every time, 30% of the Muslim students say Israeli-Palestinian activism. I don't want to get involved. I am not interested. I am sick and tired of it even, because of the community, because of all sorts of different reasons and personal reasons. I just make sure I will not receive any email vis-a-vis Israeli-Palestinian. I don't have my horses in this race. I am not Arab, I'm not Middle Eastern, I am not entirely happy how the organized Muslim communities are running the show about this or obsessed with it. So to think that all Jews are like this, all Muslims are like that, that's absolutely far from being true.
In terms of loud voices, I think it really goes to geopolitics, because I shared a statistic that 60% of students, Muslim students that attend school here in the US are born elsewhere. In the Jewish community, there's a connection, of course, to Israel. I think what needs to happen is sort of deconstruct that notion that we are really, this is reality. We live in the United States, and I think we tend to forget that. And displace our identity onto something that's overseas. And so when students bring speakers on campus, they're representing either Egypt or Syria or Palestine or Israel, which becomes an issue that's not an American issue necessarily in the minds of Jews and Muslims as a whole. But on campus, that becomes a problem. That's what I'm saying, that the magnifying lens is on that those are the issues that students are really invested in. That creates a problem that you're talking about.
I wonder if you could speak to, this is a specific conversation about American universities and colleges. And without getting into what the world does, what do you think it is about the specific location of the United States, the history perhaps of the University of the United States, but also just the way we kind of function as a country that can be a positive, hopefully, but also if there are negatives. And I want to, I'm going to complicate this question a little bit. If you're interested in this question, I happen to be. Is there a difference between the public university and the private university in the way they can engage these questions? So does University of Florida have different issues than, say, a Duke or a Manhattan College, which are private and have a religious history embedded in their DNA?
Are we going the same order? Why don't you go first for the first time, for a break?
I mean, these are really, really good questions. There are different issues, I think. Reza Aslan and Aaron Tapper put a book together, which is the commonalities, what is it? I don't know the whole title of the book, but it's on American Muslims, and the last part is about American university campus. And one point that Aaron Tapper makes about this question is that there is not much difference between public and private sector. Private can control their environment much better because of where they're placed. So it becomes a socioeconomic reality. For example, Muslims will attend schools that are closer to their homes because of the culture that they come from. So you have to look at all these kind of demographics. The second aspect of your question is, does Manhattan College have different issues? I think one of the challenges, like I said, was we do need to attract more Jewish students. But there's a history, again, that has been touched on in terms of Judaism in the Catholic Church. And why Muslims are indeed attracted to Catholic schools is because that comfort of value, conservatism, perhaps a little bit of a missionary colonial history, I mean, all of that is a comfort and attraction. But I think the mission of the college is what's more important here. Like I was talking about being a Lassallian, which sounds weird, but it really does not. You don't have to be a Catholic. You don't have to be a Christian. You can be a Jew or a Muslim, or you could even be a secular, but have that Lassallian mission, which everybody shares on campus. And I think that's why I was talking about centering it, rather than saying you're the MSA, you're the Hillel, you're the Christians. That decenters the whole identity of the college.
When I was passionately saying why American Muslims and Jews has a moral imperative to model and exemplify meaningful, substantial, healing, therapeutic Jewish-Muslim conversations and relationships, because there is an overarching identity, being an American, that we can reach out and invest. There is something beyond our religious, ethnic, racial identities. But any other parts of the world, including Europe, like a French Jew and a French Muslim, they will not necessarily meet in the being French. If you, for example, put a full room of Duke Muslim students, Muslim Blue Devils, in one room, you see, in my Juma, I have about 120 Muslim students. These 120 Muslim students reflect the entire linguistic, sectarian, ethnic, racial diversity of the Muslim world. What is the most common denominator among these 120 Muslim Blue Devils is not being Muslim, is being American. Speaking English as a mother tongue, and having parents who speak English with a thick accent like I do. So in that overarching identity, American college campuses have unique opportunity to have come up with a kind of substantial, inspiring Jewish-Muslim conversations.
Again, I think I think it depends greatly on the particulars of the public university and the private university. I worked at Stanford Hillel prior to going to rabbinical school, and so different universities then are going to be able to address some of the challenges or unique opportunities, as it might be, to interact and partner with religious organizations. One thing that comes up sometimes at public universities, but not at all of them, is what exactly the relationship, how much can you partner if there's a separation of church and state, how much funding for student groups can come from the university if it's considered government money, who's hiring the religious staff. There are chaplains at private universities that are hired by the universities, whereas at a public university, it's completely separate, although if there's a good relationship between the university and the religious organization, there might be an affiliate staff type of partnership. But again, it's going to be really different, I think, from place to place.
In that spirit, it's also worth mentioning the existing 11 full-time Muslim college chaplains, 10 of them are from private universities. Only University of Michigan, because university itself cannot provide financial resources, it's the Muslim community and the Muslim alumni put together the money to hire a Muslim chaplain. But there's an exceedingly overrepresentation of the private universities in that kind of religious services as far as Muslims are concerned.
I want to get to your questions. I want to ask one last question, which is, how do you spiritually deal with this? Because just hearing all three of you speak, there's a passion, there's a deep vocational pull to this work, or you wouldn't be doing it. But it's also exhausting, it's frustrating, and it's heartbreaking. And so I wonder if you can talk a little bit about your own spiritual ways of being strong in the face of adversity, and just by means of kind of sharing.
Sure. My wife often calls me as masochist. Someone who likes pain, who enjoys. But because that's how I process God. The way in which I experience God and feel the presence of God in my life. Because God will judge me based on what I do, not based on the results, based on the great outcomes and etc. And I just want to make sure I am vertically okay in my moral, ethical responsibilities. I am hearing the ethical, moral voice in my life. And I feel one of the urgent calls coming out of Sinai, as I said, is to improve Jewish-Muslim relations.
There's an idea in Judaism that we are not obligated to complete the task, but neither are we free to completely remove ourselves from our role in making a small difference. So even though I don't necessarily anticipate solving all of the challenges of Muslim and Jewish relationships this year, why not? I don't. It would be great. I strive for it, but I also don't get defeated when it seems that I'm encountering some challenges, and know that it's all about the little steps towards the goal.
Now, I'm getting all religious and sentimental about this. No, but no, I think, I think as a Muslim, I think one of my really, really favorite verses in the Quran really discusses justice and to speak out against false rumors, and whether it be against your parents or your own community, you must fight for justice. And I think that just reverberates and echoes in my mind as I hear anti-Semitism, I hear anti-Christian sentiment, or any of these kind of really opposing values that I was not raised with as a Muslim. And I feel that to stand up and to be spiritual about it is the only Islamic thing you can do. And for me, it's not just a calling, but it's actually a push that I have no control over.
Thank you. This question is, says, what is the motivation for a college to put religion at the center of its dialogue? Why would they do that? And who can get that to happen? It's an interesting question because I think religion is not always, I mean, of course, I think any college would say education is at the center of our mission. They would because that would be the default. But I think religious dialogue is very interesting. Like, how do you three push to have religious dialogue be more in the center and less of a kind of peripheral, extracurricular idea, and really part of the center of what it means to be at University of Florida or at Duke or Manhattan?
I like to say often that the programming at Hillel is student-driven. That doesn't mean that the staff doesn't contribute their own ideas or suggest things, but I think one of the reasons that religion is in the center is because it's important to the students who are there, that they see college as a unique opportunity to question things that, their preconceived notions, things that they were raised with, and especially for those who didn't have an opportunity to meet people of other religious faiths or really interact in a substantial way with people of different backgrounds previously, that they want to really seize this opportunity, and so we're following their lead with that.
I know not everybody is religious, and religion is not important for everybody, but I am blessed to be on a campus where religion is important. Religion is not silenced, and God talk, you don't have to walk on eggshells when you talk about religion. If our job is education, more importantly, formation of young souls and building in their personalities, and if religion and their religious identities are important for him, how can you exclude the voice of religion from that conversation of character building, personality building? Because they will change not only intellectually, but spiritually as well. How can you even imagine that these kids, those who take religion seriously, will check out their religious identity when they get into campus and will only consider their education as a head game, intellectual growth? I don't understand.
I mean, I have actually a lot to say on this issue, but I won't go beyond 10 minutes. No. I am at Manhattan College, and I keep talking about LaSalle, but we're a Catholic school. Just think about how I feel. Okay, I'm a Muslim woman at a Catholic college, heading a Holocaust center. I mean, if we want to talk about center or faith, it's a courageous thing that the college did. And that is the piece, and the interfaith piece at the center is supported by the campus, is done by the students. Speaking of the Chabad community, we did a project in the Bronx, in Parkchester, where an Imam at Al-Iman Mosque gave up a room inside of his own mosque, which is a huge parking garage, to the Chabad community who had lost their synagogue because they couldn't afford it. So my Catholic students from Manhattan College went and refurbished a room for the synagogue inside of the mosque. Those kind of projects, I think, are really the impetus of why I love the job, why it makes it so exciting and so central, not just for faculty, but for students, for community, for campus ministry. All of these people are involved in terms of that. So there's a lot to be said in terms of my college, in terms of that thirst.
I have one last question. There were a few questions that were that asked this, so I promise it's not me asking it. But what role do you think Christianity, whether Catholic or Protestant, plays in being a positive force? What would you like Christianity to be? I mean, we can't say like everything, but like what positive role? Is it to just leave you guys alone a little bit and say you guys need to talk to each other and I don't have to be present at every single thing you do? Or is it, or are there more, that's a ministry of absence, I can do that, but I can also, I can also do a ministry of presence. So I think, there are several members. I see some callers in the house. I'm just wondering, is there some?
Some color.
Let me get on the mic. No, is there anything else that, that you might desire from your colleagues, either professional colleagues or the wider Christian community, that would help Muslim, Jewish students and dialogue on campus?
I think all of the above. As I said briefly, minister of absence is required. Jews and Muslims, they need bilateral relationship. Jews, and I feel very strongly about this. Once you include the third voice, it really changed the whole dynamics. In addition to having those trialogue and even all other faith community, that should be in addition to a consistent, intentional, well-developed, well-motivated Jewish-Muslim bilateral conversation. But at the same time, I am really, really inspired, deeply moved by the relative success that the Jews and Christians had in reconciling with each other. The funniest term I heard in English when I came to the United States was Judeo-Christian. I thought somebody was joking. Judeo-Christian civil... Like, who in sane mind look at the 2,000 years of history and talk about Judeo-Christian civilization? Like, what are you talking? Are you joking? Look at... But then you understand the point. There is an incredible relative success after Second World War. That the mountains have been moved. Hearts have been changed. Millennium-long practices of hate, deeply rooted exclusion, changed into the inclusion. I think that Christian, Jewish success has a lot to offer to the potential Jewish-Muslim conversation. I hope Christians will be there as a source of guide, mentorship, and share that experience generously.
We're going to order again, right?
I don't know. I agree that to a large extent, I think if there are issues between two people, then having a third party come in just sort of creates all sorts of messy triangulation issues. That being said, I think that there are opportunities, especially in Gainesville, for there to be an understanding between Christians and Muslim students as well. And so if there are tensions between maybe this group and this group, then for all three to come together as sort of a starting point, maybe it can help lower the tensions a bit if we're able to come together all with a little bit of uncertainty and be able to learn from one another. But ultimately, I think that this conversation, as we all sort of seem to be nodding around the table, we have our own issues and our own challenges that we need to be able to work out.
I don't know if I agree with that, because for a Muslim, it's hard to just jump over Christianity and get to Islam, in my mind, in terms of history. I think that perhaps having Christians in the room is way more important than we think, because there's different issues between Jews and Christians, Muslims and Christians, but there's also a lot of positive things. So maybe having them there present, maybe not as an active participant, but somebody who can be there as a support or guidance or even be there for advice during the session could really actually be something phenomenal. We could learn from that experience, because I think it's a whole for me not to see Christians not being partners in this relationship or bad relationship. I don't know what to call it. I don't even know if it's a relationship in that way. So I see it more as all of the Abrahamic faiths participating in this.
Thank you very much.
Sorry, I have to include the Christians.
I want to thank our 4 participants for really a spectacularly intelligent conversation. Paul, thank you for your gracious leading and egging on this panel. You've been there in the trenches, and I don't know if you still do this. Paul told me last year, I think when he was speaking at JTS, that he reads every religion submission that comes into the Huffington Post, and that is the second most frequently read vertical in the Huffington Post. So Paul knows American religion probably better than anyone alive, and we're grateful for your knowledge. Mehnaz, I want to thank you, and I also want to point to the fact that you talked about being on a campus that's very supportive, and I would be remiss if I didn't recognize the fact that Manhattan College's administration is here to show their support, and that's really remarkable. And Gail, it's great to have you back home. I've been looking for an opportunity to bring you back, and what a perfect opportunity it is. It can't be easy being in Gainesville. It can't be easy being Jewish in Gainesville. It certainly can't be easy being a Muslim in the town where the pastor wants to burn the Quran.
Oh, he's not there anymore.
But he's not. But you know, and I've been on that campus to see Jewish-Muslim relations, and we thank you for your daily work. I have to say a really special thank you to Abdullah. Early this morning in Raleigh, Abdullah got to the airport and learned that his flight was delayed an hour. Then it was delayed a second hour. Then it was canceled. As Abdullah wrote me in an email, it's not an easy thing to be visibly Muslim hanging around an American airport. And he was twice randomly chosen for a check on his way to New York today. He truly made heroic efforts to be here, and we are really endlessly grateful not only that you're here, but for the depth and perception and good humor of your presentation. Thank you. In my moment of despair, thinking that Abdullah might not make it, I reached out to a colleague and said, "Are you willing to be a pinch hitter if need be?" And he responded succinctly, and he said, "If it means Abdullah will owe me one, I'm happy to." So I want to thank my colleague, Dr. Hussein Rashid, for being willing and being here. We have already recognized Angelica Berry, but as usual, she sits quiet in her corner. Angelica, stand up so we can all appreciate the extraordinary work you do. You've met Rabbi Bemperad, and I should also recognize Ruth Salzman, who is the CEO of the Berry Foundation, and Ruth really makes these things happen. I want to thank the audience. I'm only sorry we couldn't go till 10:30 tonight because the questions I sorted through were uniformly intelligent and on point, and you've been very gracious. I want to close just by saying that I am aware of the fact that many people in the room tonight have contact with the very college students we've been talking about. And I want to make sure that you know that here at JTS, we are starting a new master's program in Jewish ethics. We have an expanded master's program in modern Jewish studies with a focus on Israel studies. And we have a summer Beit Midrash text study program called Nishma. We are very happy that the director of graduate admissions, Ms. Abby Eisenberg herself, stand up, is here. And Abby will be waiting outside at the table for any of you who want to talk to her about programs for your kids, for signing up for yourself, or for other programs at JTS. Thank you. Good night.